So yeah, so good morning, good afternoon, at least to Matt, maybe some of the attendees too. So today we're gonna kind of continue down our path on the tech talks around user-defined polling or monitoring, right? That topic. So last time we covered the API, right? Poller and user-defined use cases, and this time we're gonna kind of similar vein, go down the path of webhooks, right, and user-defined, and kind of talk through that. So I think the hope here is to demystify a little bit of what a webhook is, why we've gone down this path, and where they maybe fit into the story, and then spend a little bit of time walking through some use cases, and hopefully maybe Pete and Matt have something to show us in the vein of in webhooks, right? So from a kind of housekeeping standpoint, this is not not a traditional webinar, right? We don't have a big deck that we got to get through or talk through or whatever. So we'll do some Q&A at the end just to clean anything up. But if you have questions as we're going, feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A functionality, and we'll either answer them kind of in line as they come in, or we might hold off just because you're 2 minutes early on when we were going to get there anyways, right? But the hope here is to have a little bit of a roundtable discussion and have you guys participate as much or as little as makes sense for you. So thanks for joining us, and I think the starting place is really what are webhooks, right? I think a lot of people talk about them like they're kind of trivial and easy, but I think that coming from an infrastructure background, server network, there's that knowledge that they're kind of easy, right? But also there's not a lot of experience or exposure necessarily into what they are, right? So we see that, I see that from talking with people, right? That it's just not something we spend a ton of time on. The easy analogy, right, if we bring it back to monitoring, right, is they're modern traps, right? It's a triggered message that comes from a device or a platform, right, and has a payload, right? It's a little bit, different than what's in a trap, and there's some different rules and all those sorts of things, right? But from a what's it like, right? I think that's a really easy model to think about these. From how do they work, right? It's just a crafted URL, right? So there's an endpoint, and all the bits, right, of the message or the data sit within that URL, right? So the source, basically visits that web page, and we get that data to be pumped into the target, right? In this case, we're talking about Entuity. Now, we've been using webhooks as part of Entuity for a couple of years now. They've been, up till now, product-led, right? So different platforms that have leveraged webhooks, as we've added support or increased support for them, we've mapped kind of specifically what matters and how to handle those. Where the user-defined webhooks or what we're looking at today come in is where Entuity has now exposed that functionality to customers, to users, to be able to handle whatever webhooks they have, right? And so that could be platforms that we don't necessarily have support for yet, or might not ever support, right? Some platforms are kind of small and niche, and we might not get to them, right? And so this kind of puts that power into your hands, right, to be able to cover whatever use case you have with Entuity. And I think that it also gives you the ability to do some interesting things, right? But before we get too far into there, I do want to take a second real quick and just introduce my two co-conspirators, if you will. So today with me, I've got Pete Bartz. Pete's on our solution architecture team. He's been with Entuity for a long time. Is it a long time, Pete?
For a decade, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I've got Matt Miller from the UK. Matt's also on the solution architecture team. You've been here. If Pete's a long time, are you a medium or also a long time?
Not quite as long as Pete. I think it's 8 years this year.
Oh, so, but you're not the new guy either. So yeah, so that works. You know, I guess the question I'd ask for you guys is, you know, when you think about webhooks, what do you think is important for people to think about or, you know, kind of have in their head as they're contemplating, you know, why does this matter to me or whatever?
I see webhooks as though, coming out of that traditional network environment and that infrastructure environment. Network people know about traps, they know about syslog as ways to tell some story, but even in those cases, you're sort of confined to what the limitations of a device are. A webhook is really, I think, an open field for telling a story about something. It can, like you said, it can be a device, it could be an application, it could be whatever you want to tell. But it's kind of an easy way to be able to build a story and push that kind of one-way notification. I think it would complement some of the REST API polling too that we talked about on the last Tech Talk.
Yeah, it's almost you know, that polled or consistent kind of data point versus you know, the right now, right? I don't want to wait for the next polling interval. I don't need a time series of this, right? It's, you know, it's event data, right? I have a problem, I have an incident, right? Like, I mean, that's where my head goes, right? Here's a timely message that I need to have into the event management system, right? So Pete, I just want to pick on what you said there, tell a story, right? So that's a really interesting concept that I think makes a lot of sense in monitoring. And I also think that it's easy to fall into that. You know, it's just speeds and feeds, right? We're looking for red and we want to fix it, right? And we don't think about the idea of a story, right?
Yeah, it's like going to the doctor and you tell them you're sick versus the doctor taking your temperature, taking your blood pressure, doing all the tests, and then saying, "Oh yeah, you're sick." So, it's that real-time thing that can actually be, I think it can be more targeted, depending upon how you tell the story. Certainly that's the art. But being able to consume that story and then tie it together with other things that you're, taking it back to infrastructure, other things that you're monitoring, tell that combined story after you're leveraging that type of an event. I think that's pretty powerful.
Well, and you know, so we're talking about reactive, but what about you know, what about an enrichment type data, right? So, you know, this story gets me thinking about like additional context, right? So, you know, I think the oldest problem in monitoring was sort of those very very engineer written alert messages, right? You know, X is greater than Y, and you're like, what? You know, is that bad? What does that mean, right? What is X, right? What are we talking about? And so I think the early monitoring products did a lot there, but you know, we really get into this concept of, you know, multiple sources of truth and you know, more data, right? So Matt, I mean, do you see this story that Pete's telling, right? Is there opportunities to enrich that with maybe non-traditional data sources or things that we don't think about, right? Not just, you know, I've added a host name from, you know, or I you know, named the device based off its system name field in SNMP, right? But really getting into kind of more there.
Yeah, so you could have other tools that might also be talking to a particular device, and something about that device might change in that tool. So for example, ServiceNow, something about that device could change in service now. So its operational status within the CMDB could change, and that could get pushed into Entuity, and we can relate it to the device that we're monitoring in Entuity.
Wow. Without beating the heck out of this story analogy, right? I mean, that just adds more depth, right, to what you're trying to tell, as far as, no longer is it X is greater than Y. It's, here's some additional detail from, the application that's sitting on top of that network. Here's some detail coming from the ITSM, right? Maybe another monitoring platform, right? Is that something we could do?
Yeah, if that platform could send webhooks, then definitely.
I think in
Great.
terms of an application type of a monitoring platform too. When you get into the real APM bits, being able to send a story about some application from that platform that's directed to something that's related in Entuity. Again, it's coming from a third party.
So almost using a best in breed APM tool, right? And then having or the APM tool that you got, right? And using that to send over maybe a performance metric or an incident or something like that into Entuity, so that we could show it next to maybe a SurePath or a network performance object.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
I run into customers that, they don't have the big APM tools, but they've got a lot of historic knowledge sitting in scripts. Can you find a way to leverage some of that information and bring it together into one place? I think that's a good story as well.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. No. So the we'll call it pre-tools monitoring, right? We've got a shell script or a routine that we run, and it'll tell us whether or not the app's functional, right? They're always called watchdog when people write them. So we've got a couple of quick questions here. So Kevin asked, could it be used to push data into a REST API? So this is almost a from Entuity to somebody else, right? So the functionality we're talking about today is really around ingesting webhooks from other sources. Maybe a future tech talk, we could talk through how to use the EMS and some of the scripting to take Entuity data into other platforms, right? I know today we've got out of the box integrations into things like Splunk and Panda and things like that, right? But those are just the out of the box. That doesn't mean that's all that's possible, right? So the tool definitely has some extensibility there. And then Clayton asked, is it possible to monitor the download upload speed? Maybe I've been in tools monitoring too long. The answer is always yes, right? Can you monitor something? Sure, right? What I would, I'm not sure I totally get the context of the question there, right? Which download upload speed we'd want to look at, right? But if it comes to interface statistics, we can look at both upload and download out of like a network facing interface. If we were looking at a cloud platform and that was one of the counters they had, right, and we wanted to send that over, right, I mean, we'd be somewhat dependent upon the platform there, right, of what they have and what they can send over. Okay, so we're about 15 minutes in, and so we don't kill everybody just staring at us, because it's usually why you do PowerPoint, so you don't have to look at me, right? But we did kind of want to show some use cases, right? And so who wants to go first?
I can pick up an example. I think I think is a good example, leveraging one of the concepts that you talked about in the last Tech Talk, where you were looking at REST API user-defined polling. So I'm going to pick up on some of that weather topic that JD was talking about in the last call.
I love the weather story. While you're getting that set up and getting scared, it's sometimes applicable to kind of knock work, right? Because weather can have an impact on power, I remember a T1 circuit from 20 years ago that every time it rained in Syracuse, New York, it would go down because there was infiltration on the conduit, right? So it's helpful, but it's also easy to understand, right? You don't have to know switches to know. We've all looked at enough weather, right? So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I mean, the concept itself isn't anything about network devices per se. It's about, the story about weather, the concept of weather, and how do you apply that. So this is just the weather dashboard that you were doing some review on in the last Tech Talk, and how to build that. But the method to build this is leveraging, there's a ping-only device that's actually, looking for the state of something, but effectively you're picking up metrics from some third-party source. Now, what can be helpful with this is, you can put thresholds against temperature and alert to that. But what if the National Weather Service sends a thunderstorm warning out? So that's a notify. We get these on our phones all the time. It's like I get it all the time in Minneapolis when we're having a problem with weather. So in this case, how can you leverage this picture to be able to get notification? And the way to do that is actually with a webhook. So I've got an example. If I take a look at the incidents, I've actually got a webhook that came into the system and it actually staged itself out. So I'm going to create another one because I have a way to build these on demand. And I'm actually pushing a webhook directly into this object. So, I set the webhook up with an event name called severe weather. Again, this is really straightforward. I won't go through the details of how to set it up. I'll actually show you the admin side a bit, but the method in actually setting up a webhook is pretty straightforward. Just take a look at the Help Center documentation. But in this case, I'm sending a severe weather alert. I'm targeting that same source device, Mayfield Heights, that's picking up temperature and humidity and wind speed. And I'm just taking the payload from that severe weather alert itself from that source. So the source is telling me what's going on. It's telling me the story that I include as details. It's a really straightforward way to actually do that notify. And again, I can couple that together with all of the, the API metrics that I'm picking up as well. But just, to show what it looks like, I won't go through the process of building it. But if I go to the administrative screens, I'll just go into the custom webhooks menu. And I've built a webhook group for weather, and I've associated the Mayfield Heights object for that as an endpoint. But the piece of this that you want to pay attention to, that again, it's very straightforward in the UI to build this, is, here's the event name that I want to build, the rule that I want to build. I've got some conditions. I'll talk about conditions in another example, but I'm just associating a custom event, called it severe weather. And then I'm formatting the data that comes across within that webhook payload. This is all driven out of the UI. Once that's in the system, you're going to start seeing it, directly as an incident or as a raw event.
So really any source, any platform or data source that can send a webhook, right? We can convert over. I know weather's kind of really basic, but that's the point, right? This is meant to be kind of the easy illustration that we all understand. And obviously you did a similar, because it wouldn't be a great demo because there's probably not a severe weather alert in Mayfield Heights right now. But really you're just looking for where's that data coming from at that point, right? And then how's it going to tell your story with incidents or whatever else, right?
Yeah, again, we're looking at a platform to collect the data here. But from a webhook perspective, I just sent a curl command with a formatted, webhook type that I needed. And I pushed it to the Entuity system and then said target Mayfield Heights. So it can come from some other source. It doesn't have to be the same one that you're polling.
Great. Yeah. Now, Pete, is there any big lift that we're not seeing that we've hit here, right? Or is this, we walked through the kind of the high level on the admin screens, right? But
yeah.
For some of these SNMP trap replacement models, right? Are we looking at, only people who've been doing this for 10 years can do it? Or, I mean, it looked easy enough that I could figure it out, right? I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, the webhook definition here is really straightforward. I mean, even, setting up the rules, it's a stepwise process. You define a webhook group. At that point, you can identify how you're going to authenticate. Again, this is all documented. Anybody that's worked kind of in that REST space is certainly going to understand this. But to be honest, I don't have a history in REST technology. I come from the network side of the house. So for me, picking this up, it was really straightforward as well. But once you define that group and associate, an endpoint that's part of that, you can actually, pick up payloads. These are actually payloads that have come into the system that are showing kind of that construct. Here's the type of event this is, and here's the details for the severe weather at Mayfield Heights. And you can identify those as payloads. And then once you've got that set up, then creating a rule is actually also very straightforward. Put a condition against it. In that payload, I'm looking for the string of thunder. I can look for thunderstorm. I can look for Pete. I can look for anything that's contained. And then based on that, I'm going to apply this event. Now, the interesting part about this is I'm creating an event in the event management system here, but I don't have to go into the EMS to actually create it. I'm actually creating it here, and it's going to dynamically be built into my active project within the EMS. So, and we're trying to build a kind of a seamless workflow to be able to get these onboarded.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's super easy. Great.
Yeah, it's a little different than a trap or syslog. Traps or syslog you handle within the event management system. Here, you just handle this all in one place. So
Pete, thinking about weather, right? So we're all good there, but
yeah.
Is there a more practical IT department type use case that kind of mirrors this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the concept of actually sending a message from something. One that I was looking for, I actually did some Googling for this as well, but I've had a number of customers ask me about this, and it's a really simple use case, and that is I've got a Linux server, and I just want to track who's logged into root and when they log out. Just, every time somebody logs into root or something logs into root, tell me about it, or any username effectively. And that actually can be done as well. I've got that simulated here. I've got a webhook in place where the source of that webhook is my Linux server. And it's just a bash script that's sitting in my Linux server. It leverages the PAM module, the authentication module on Linux. So anytime you log in, it runs this script. The script actually just sends a curl command with a post with the webhook. So again, the process of the webhook is really straightforward. The art of this is actually the script and the back end link into a Linux PAM module. But effectively what this is doing is modeling every time somebody logs in and logs out from one of my servers, I'm actually seeing that log off and log in. I'm seeing who logged in and where they logged in from. Because again, this is just data that's included in that webhook message.
Wow. So really anything out there.
Yeah.
As long as it's got curl.
This ties, a server that I'm managing. So I've got this server under management. So I'm picking up performance and everything else, but now I'm actually adding in, who's logged into the system. I'm telling that story in a real-time sense.
So Don's asking, one of the limitations that he saw with the webhooks is that there's not a method to dynamically associate an event to any source or device. So I think what he's getting at here is based on the payload of the webhook, right? Defining the target, right? I think the API puller's got a concept where based on payload, right, we can associate. What do you guys think about that? Is that, do you guys agree with Don? We should put that on the list?
Yeah, Matt, the webhook itself's got to have a defined target, right?
Yeah. So when you create in the webhook, you create the group and then you associate sort of devices into that group, and each device would have a specific endpoint. So in the URL would be the server ID that device is on, and then the device's ID. So then when the webhook comes in with that URL, Entuity knows what to associate that event to, whatever device it may be. If you're able to sort of show that full URL, you could see in there.
Yeah, I've got the script that I used for the Linux login here. I can put that up on the screen. So yeah, effectively what you're saying, the URL is pointing to the Entuity server, and then within that URL, you need to identify the ID of the target endpoint that you're picking, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting enhancement request on. I know that the next time I talk to those guys, I'll be asking if we could do that. So Matt, with that, so Pete's given us kind of the extension of the weather. This is maybe going to become a theme, right? We'll show off tools with the weather. And now this login modifier, which is great, right? This, I think I'll say I've never met admins that don't have a little script that does a little something, right? So this is a really easy way to kind of pull that in. From a third-party tools perspective, what kind of things could we look to do here?
So I've got an example I wanted to show with ServiceNow. Let me just share my screen. So we can create a change request or schedule a change request within ServiceNow, and that could be sent as a webhook into Entuity, which is what we've got set up here. So I'm just going to show you in the rule. So this webhook will send us this payload, which gives us a change ID, a description, the end and start, and the name of the device, and then its state. And this is just a type of webhook that ServiceNow is sending, which is change scheduled. So when that comes in, that raises, if I just minimize that, sorry, we'll raise these events saying change request scheduled, and in the details of that event, we're getting the change ID and the start and end and the details. So if I just quickly do something in ServiceNow so we can get one of those to come in. I just go, so we've got this device here, and we're looking at its incidents. So we should have now a webhook that's come in. Yeah, so you can see here, we've got this CMDB change request scheduled. And if we look in the details, we can see it's got the ID and when it starts and ends, and just some details. In this case, it just says an example of a change request. So we know in Entuity now that that device is scheduled to have a change made to it. But what I've done here is using the event management system, this event's come in, and from these details, we've pulled these details out. And if I just go into administration, we've used those details to create a maintenance window for that device in Entuity. So in this case, it's suppressing the event. So during that change, we're not going to see any events from that device. So yeah, that's sort of how we could use it with something like ServiceNow. We could also, similar to what we had in the previous tech talk where we were getting the CMD operational status, we could get the webhooks from when that operational status changes. So if you can just show the example of that, 2 seconds. Just need to change it in ServiceNow, which is typically going a bit slow for me. There we go. There we go. Wait, good in a second.
We're waiting on electrons to travel, right? That's always always the delay.
Yeah. So yeah, but look, there we go. You can see now we've got this CMD offer status changed, and then again in details, it's telling us the current state and the previous state. So you could use this to set like the severity. So in the event management system, you could pull out information for the details to enrich the events that we're receiving as well.
So Tim's asking for maybe some documentation around how this works, right? So, because I'm also amazed here, right? I thought it was neat when we could pull in, you know, the change request as an incident, right? And I'm thinking, oh, an operator, now they've got that data right there in Entuity to know, you know, that you know, this is planned or scheduled or whatever, right? But to take it to that next level, right? To automate the maintenance window.
Yeah.
Never again will we call an engineer while they're doing maintenance, right? Or hopefully, right? That's crazy. That's a great feature. And then so beyond setting up the you know, the webhook, right? Similar to what Pete showed earlier. You know, what else did we have to do here? Was this so you said EMS rules or the path?
Yeah, so I'd set up the webhook, and then because when we create that webhook, the custom webhook, it creates an event which is now in our events management project. I created a new action in the events management project that essentially pulls out that information about the change request, and then essentially it does an API call to itself. So it uses Entuity's API to create the maintenance window in Entuity using the data that is pulled out of the event. It's possibly not the no, it's a pretty simple way to sort of
As you say, it's an advanced concept, but definitely something an Entuity administrator could handle with a bit of documentation and some experience with EMS in the past, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to have a PhD in Entuity, right?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So really starting to get into how webhooks fit into kind of the different parts of the product, right, and can be used to do more than just, you know, the trap use case, right? Which great, right? But if we can do more with it as far as setting a maintenance window, I think our managed services team is going to need to talk to you after this, Matt. They probably have some enhancement requests, right? So that's really neat. And then Tim, I think what we can do is work with Susan and Stuart and everybody. Maybe this could be a good white paper / document, right, to go up on the support site, right, as an example use case. I know that we've prepared a couple of collateral items for today. I think, you know, Pete's script and some of the data flow kind of explained, right? But you know, I think this is a gosh, what's the term? Hero use case, right? Where you know, being able to set maintenance mode off of webhooks would be a big deal, not just from ServiceNow, right, but from whatever other systems may be, right? So yeah, perfect. Now, so Pete, you've got a bit of a science project to show us, yeah?
Yeah.
But really, it's not a science project. Sorry, it's a literature project because you're going to tell a story. Yeah. I'll let you take it from there. That's quite the lead, right?
Thanks. Well, I mean, again, this is really leveraging all the concepts that we've talked about up till now, and it actually takes what Matt was doing as, you know, a webhook comes into the system, and then within the event management system, we're taking some action. That action would be use the API to set up a maintenance window. I'm going to take it a step further because, you know, when you look at customers that have got application monitoring methods. It could be a script, it could be some homebrew type of activity. It sort of goes to the first question of how do you measure upload and download speed? If you've got a server that can go out and measure its own upload and download speed and then generate a webhook and tell you that story, you can ingest that just as an event. But take it a little bit step further and say you've got an application that's looking at response times. So you've got some tool out there, could be a piece of software, could be a script, but it's measuring some type of response time, some type of time series data. And can you use that webhook not only to notify if there's an issue or not in real time, but actually then ingest some of the data that can be included in a payload? So my literature project and the story is I've got an application. Within that application, I'm measuring certain aspects of response time. In my case, I've got, I think, 7 different response time measurements, and then I've got a total. But I want to be able to track that response time over time because it's good to know that, yeah, it passed or it failed or it's a problem or it's not. But is it something where I can track it and say, okay, here's the part of the response time that was actually the problem? So I'll share my screen out again, and I'll just show you what it is here. I call this application 1. But what application 1 is an endpoint of a webhook that is receiving individual response time measurements and then just a state indication of whether or not it passed or it failed. Now, what's different from other examples that we've talked about today is application 1 isn't a device that's monitored. It's not a network device or a server that's monitored. It's not a ping-only device like Mayfield Heights was a ping-only device that's monitored in the server. This is actually an Entuity custom device. So this is a device that doesn't do any polling. All it does is, kind of exist in the system. And I'll show you the webhook definition, then I'll talk about what we did to be able to track this type of information. But the webhook itself is just I call the group webhook simulator. But when I take a look at the rules, I've got a number of rules in the system that are leveraging that payload. If I take a look at the payload and go into the Explorer, you can see the payload of that application includes the name of it. These are all just parts of a curl command. In my example, this is actually just a script that I run, but this could come from some third-party tool, could come from any application script that somebody's got written. But I've also got measurements for different parts of the response time. So within this payload, what I'm doing is not only generating an alert, but I'm generating, taking the information from that alert and applying it to time series attributes in Entuity. Now, these are custom attributes. You'd have to, we'd have to work with customers to be able to build these. This isn't something customers are just going to do out of the gate. We need to build some Stormworks attributes to be able to do this for someone. But effectively, what's happening is that event comes into the system as a webhook. It's going to generate an event, but then it's also going to absorb the data for each one of these time series attributes into an actual stream in the system. And it's actually done within the event management system. I've got a rule in the system that says take that webhook, parse it out, and then absorb and write each one of these values into a stream. So I can track the individual time series. So when you actually see that an application has failed, or in this case, it's actually corrected itself because it's dropped below a threshold. But in this case, this one has passed, but I can look at this over time and say, okay, when it failed, this response time was the reason it failed. So this is just a stacked area chart. This is standard in Entuity. But again, the individual concepts of this are I'm not only generating an event from a webhook, but I'm actually influencing and adding metrics into the system and storing these metrics over time to be used, in this type of a fashion. And I'm also, see, I just updated here as well, but I'm also updating the status. of this application. And this is just, an amorphous application. It's a custom object. I call it application 1 because it's talking about a collection. Could be multiple servers. It talks about a cluster of web servers. It's whatever story you want. And it's the state of the application, regardless of the state of the infrastructure that's running it. Now, the nice thing about using this type of an object, again, this is a custom object, but a custom object, just like a managed device or a ping object, can be added to things like services. So I've got a service definition. If I take a look at the services that I've just got a view built, but I've got a service definition built that's looking at application 1. Now, as an Entuity service, I can put different components in that service, and one of those is that custom device. Along with that, I've got one of my servers and one of my network switches that are sitting down in Brazil. So this service definition is now taking application response time measurements and defining whether or not it's good or bad. And then it's looking at the infrastructure that's composing that, that overall application set and tying it into a service. So again, it's different ways to leverage. It's take the payload out of a specific webhook, do it in real time. You want to be careful, be careful of volume. Payloads can be really chatty, so you want to be really careful about volume. But in that case, take the data out of the payload, write it in as an attribute within the system, and then leverage the statefulness or the lack of statefulness for a custom object to be able to tell that overall story. Now, this could be a ping-only device. You can do the same type of thing, but then tie that all together within an Entuity service. Track availability of a service over time.
Well, and that could be a situation where, we take maybe a SurePath monitoring object, maybe the state of the network in a data center, right? And then add on top of that some application type monitoring, what its performance or availability is, and then use Entuity to kind of measure that SLA, right, for that, right? And so we kind of get past that point of network's green, right? But really looking at, what's the business service, right? And all the way up to the point of having, APM type metrics folded in there. That's really powerful, right? I think this specific use case, the customer's got an RPA tool, right? That they want to monitor the time on the RPA. But the use case would work for kind of anything, right?
Whatever tool can send you a webhook.
That we wanted to see this way. Now, you said that this is, the other examples so far have been, if you've used Entuity, if you've been through some training, right, with a little bit of direction, right, very achievable.
Right.
So you mentioned there was some parts here that maybe require some guidance from the Entuity organization, right?
Yeah.
Is that just a support ticket, or are we into more of a premium support, professional services kind of engagement with where we're at there?
Yeah, one of the requirements for this one, because I'm actually ingesting data, I'm doing it via the event management system. So that's just, that's a method that support can probably help actually set up. But in order to do this, you actually need to have the response time metrics, or whatever you'd call them. I call these individual metrics. These are streams. These actually had to be set up with the Stormworks configuration, and it's something that we would have to build.
So we had to dig into the database and create objects for these.
To actually create this, yeah.
Okay.
Normally a short service to be able to do this.
Okay. Perfect. Right. So definitely an advanced use case, right? And we but it would require if we needed kind of this whole solution to get there. Okay. So yeah, I'm sure you guys all know that we have PS, so I don't, that's enough there. So Kevin asks, couldn't we pair this with the UD API puller and the custom webhooks, right? So the incident data for kind of down, right? And then use the API puller for the stream data.
Yes. So if it's something that you can collect via the API, getting the data via the API puller is the best way to do it. In this case, this is coming from a source that can't be API pulled. So sending it as a webhook was a more effective method. But you could certainly tie webhooks from that API pulled device, just like you would for normal SNMP polling and then traps and syslog coming as a notify.
Okay, right. So, all right. So what you're saying there is this use case that we're showing was kind of driven by a customer that had some legacy monitoring that we needed to bring into Entuity that wouldn't support, didn't have any API pull or SNMP pull function, right? So we had to kind of push to the edges of webhooks to be able to show this total use case, right? But what Kevin's saying is totally would be the preferred outcome, right? If the app supported it, right? So to kind of pull stream data with API puller and do event data with the webhooks.
Yep.
Oh, Kevin, you might have a job on the services team. That's not a bad idea, right? So Kevin asks, what if we use the API puller to create those objects, right? And then try to populate them with the webhook.
That's something to take a look at.
I think I know what's going to happen in a lab later today. I saw the look on Pete's face. He's already thinking about it. Okay, great. So we are, we're about 45 minutes in. I would say that we are on the kind of tail end of the proposed, right? So this would be when we kind of go into Q&A, if there are any further questions about kind of the topics covered today. If you have questions later on or whatever else, always feel free to reach out to your account team or support or the product team, right? And we can kind of get you in the right path as far as that goes. If maybe you're eating a sandwich later tonight and realize, I wonder about, right? That's always the worst for me. It takes me a while to really incorporate new data, and then the question comes to me later. So understand if there aren't any right now. And then I would just point out that it is almost Q4. Yay or boo, I don't know. This year seems like it went fast, but usually put a little plug in for G2 reviews, right? So if you guys feel good and want to head over and fill one of those out, it does help the team, right? It helps other prospective users, understand good, bads, and all that from working with us. So we really do appreciate that when you guys do fill those out. So just give it another couple minutes for any questions here about webhooks, or I guess I'll do for anything, right? If there's any other questions, preferably Entuity related, right? And then I guess last call for questions not Entuity related. All right, well, very good. Thanks everybody for coming with us. Thanks to Pete and Matt for putting together these demos. I know that having read through the documentation, it's one thing, right? But to see some working use cases of art of the possible, right? That always gives me a really good feel for how I can go, the tool I have in my toolbox. Kevin, that is the highest praise. So thank you so much for that. That was the intent here, was to just kind of simplify and show what it could be. So I'm glad that landed. And in a couple of days, the marketing / support teams will they'll clean up this recording. They'll get rid of all my ums. They'll Photoshop me to look younger and prettier. And then it will be on our support site. So all the tech talks go there and are available. And unfortunately, the Photoshop takes a couple days, but it'll be up there shortly. And I think Susan or marketing will send out, we've got a couple pieces of collateral, and those will go out with the recording for everybody that was here or didn't make it. So look forward to that. And then we should see a next topic announced here shortly, right? But if anybody has a what they'd like to see or hear or get into next, this is definitely open to requests, right? So where do we want to go? I think this year we've done kind of multi-tenancy and some effective strategies there. We've done some API polling and now webhooks, right? So, James Gordon asks, does the payload contain an API key provided by the Entuity instance? Matt or Pete, who wants to take that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So when you create the webhook group and you add devices into that group, that's where you'll generate an API key, and then how you use that that API key, you also configure. I can't remember if it's on the device or at the group, but you can say whether that API key should be in the path or the URL, or it should be within the header that gets sent, or within the payload. So there's 3 options, I think there is.
That's great. Yeah, and with that, I'll just finish the pitch, right? So if there's any topics that we want to dig into, whether it's Matt or Pete or JD, or I see we've got a couple of the other solution architects on the phone, right? So we will work through the team to have some different folks present kind of where their experience lies and get you to meet and interact with the team. I think that's they're a good bunch, and I think they benefit from the Q&A and hearing what you guys are saying, right? Thanks so much for being here and participating, and we'll see you guys next time.